What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. In today's episode, which by the way is episode number 96, I am going to let you in on a little secret, and that is that it is, as I'm recording this, Thursday, the 17th of February. And believe it or not, tomorrow at midday, I am going to be getting married. So, as when you guys are listening to this, I will be a newly married man. And I have to say, my head is not quite in this podcast right now. So, but I feel like a very lucky man. Looking forward to making my vows tomorrow to a very lovely woman. And so, look, I'm going to get straight into the guest today. My guest is Mr. Neil Timmins. Now, Neil is a real estate investor today, but he spent many, many years as a very successful real estate broker. And he has authored a book by the name Unicorn Hunting. Now, there's a longer name, but it's all about real estate, and it's all about building your A team, essentially. And when you want to excel in any kind of organization or any kind of endeavor, you need to have a really, really good team around you. And so Neil's book is all about building that team and finding those people to be able to do the best possible job with your organization. Now, for those of you who are going to be listening in from Ireland, I'm sure you might be thinking, what, as an investor based in the US, what advice will he have that's applicable to me? Don't be thinking like that at all. Neil has got some really good advice for anyone who wants to get into the real estate investment industry. Advice around finding a mentor or a coach is particularly valuable, in my opinion, because Neil himself had a lot of self-limiting beliefs that held him back from getting into investment himself. Even though he was a realtor and he was out there selling property, he wasn't actually buying it himself until just about 5 years ago. Now, I really, really enjoyed this conversation with Neil, and I learned a lot myself, so I'm sure you're going to too. So please help me welcome Mr. Neil Timmins. You are listening to Behind the Facade, the number one podcast for investing with a particular focus on the real estate and property investment market. I am your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast, I'm going to be exploring the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously, both in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset and behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. Welcome to the show. Neil Timmins, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Gavin. I'm excited to be here.
It's great to have you. Tell me this: this podcast goes out to quite a lot of different countries, and I always like to start by asking my guest, where in the world are you coming in from?
I'm coming in from Des Moines, Iowa.
Des Moines, Iowa. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. And what's the climate like there at this time of the year?
This time of year, so we're recording this. It's a couple days into February. It is cold. Today is bitterly cold. I think as I drove into the office today, they said it was -1 Fahrenheit. So darn cold. But next week looks unseasonably warm. It's supposed to be in the mid-40s, which is
Yeah,
not
okay.
commonplace. Yeah.
It's a lot colder than it is here in Ireland. Anyway, I'm in Ireland, and we've got I think it's probably around 10 degrees centigrade, which is,
Yeah.
I don't know, up around 50 or something in Fahrenheit. Anyway, it's good to have you on the podcast. We're going to get into, I was looking at the details of your book. You've got a book called Unicorn Hunting, and it's
Yeah.
all about real estate. With a name like that, people might think it's about the stock market and things like that, but
Sure.
it's about real estate. We'll get into that a little bit later,
Yeah.
but I always like to kind of start with a little context and backstory. And so I just wonder if you could kind of give us a description of what was a young Neil like growing up, and kind of what drew you into the real estate industry.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So a young Neil was aggressive and into sports. So today I stand 6 feet 5 inches tall. I played college football, was all state in college, played offensive line. I was nearly 300 pounds when I played, and thank God I've shed a whole bunch of that over the years. But
Big.
I think back to fifth grade as the most memorable kind of business moment, if you will. I was a fat kid growing up. And I remember, there was a bake sale one day. Mom sent me with, it must have been a quarter to school to get my baked goods. And I attended a school K through 8, and we take turns going down to lunch. So you had fifth grade, and then right after us was sixth, seventh, eighth, all came down at one time. So I had bought my baked goods before sixth, seventh, and eighth came down, and then a whole bunch of people at my lunch table didn't want any of their cookies. So I literally, they kept piling cookies on me. So I remember I had just a giant stack of cookies. Sixth, seventh, and eighth grade came down, and they had sold out of all the baked goods.
Okay.
So all these sixth, seventh, eighth graders are like looking around like, where did all these things go? And I'm sitting there at a lunch table with a mound of cookies. So they all came over like, hey, can we buy a cookie? Yes. Cookies were 5 cents. So now I'm in business. They're 10 cents. So
I love it.
I remember, mom sent me to school with a quarter. I came home with a cupcake and $1.25.
Nice. Very good. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
a good business lesson, nice and
Yeah.
early. And
Correct.
were there any influences, like, kind of people growing up that kind of influenced you in particular?
Um, yeah, certainly, I grew up, I've got three brothers. I'm the eldest. All of us are 2 years apart. So it was just a very competitive family. My father grew up, played football, played in college as well. And so it was just a very competitive and physical environment. And so I mean, as you can imagine, my brother's just 2 years below me. We shared a room from his birth to the day I exited the house. And so we're great friends, very competitive. We learned a lot from each other, and certainly our careers and the trajectory we're on, and how we collaborate and communicate, challenge each other, has been very good from birth to today.
And are all your brothers as tall and big as you?
Pretty close. Yeah. I mean, we're all within about a couple of inches. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Giant family.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so I was looking at your LinkedIn earlier, and
Yeah.
I can see that you've been in real estate for many years, and
Right.
in different places and stuff like
Yeah.
that. I mean, prior to starting your own business, what were you doing, and or what were you working on?
Yeah. So when I graduated college, university, I came. That was over in Nebraska. I returned to Iowa. Went to work for Wells Fargo. Was a personal banker there for a couple of years. It was a really good, entry level position. I learned some sales pieces there. You wouldn't think, being a personal banker is all about sales, but Wells Fargo is all about sales. So there were some really good things there. Learned a lot about, did a lot about second mortgages. So I did a number of second mortgages, and that got me an education in first mortgages. My mom, so as I mentioned, she raised four sons. She didn't work. She literally stayed home, raised all of us. Got to the point where everybody was out, and she and I were talking one day. She goes, I think I'm out doing something. Want to do more. I'm not sure what I should do. And I said, you know what? You'd make a really good realtor. She thought about it literally for 5 seconds. She goes, you know what? I think I would. I'm going to go do that. So she went, did that. A year later, I'm still working at Wells Fargo, and her and I are talking. She's had terrific success in the first year in real estate, made it, out earned me at Wells Fargo. And so she's going, this is what I did. And I'm like, you know what? If you can do that, I can do better. How about that for a competitive family?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, I was 2 years into Wells Fargo. I decided, it's time for me to make a change. And that's how I ended up in real estate, became a realtor. And that was my first step in, where, I joined a company, the largest real estate company
Yeah.
here
Huge.
in town at the time. Yeah.
And I mean, at what stage did you decide to make the leap into kind of it being your own business that you started?
Yeah, good question. So I was with a traditional real estate company. I would say that's not your own business, although you do some things, you rely very heavy on them. I was there for about 2, 3 years, somewhere in that range. My first year in real estate, I'm just a guy, kind of burn the ships. You will not fail. I worked 355 days my first
Wow.
year in real estate. There's just no way. I'm rookie of the year. Ended up maybe into my second year, I was number 7 agent out of 700 agents in the firm. It just, and that was purely from effort. It wasn't so
Grind.
much from, yeah, it was just straight grind. And, you learn the trade, and then you just go and just try this, try that, just grind. And so from there, I'm like, you know what? All this success is largely not becoming from me, not the firm I'm associated with. So time to make a change. I joined Remax. Although it's a company, it's owned by others. In that scenario, I mean, it really is your own business. You're on your own. I was there for 2 years, and then I bought my own Remax, started my
Okay.
own team. the intent there, most Remax franchises are, end up with 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 agents, whatever it may be. My intent was to have my own team and not have any other agents. And that's what I did. Build a team of 5 people under the Remax umbrella with my own franchise, 100% my own business.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, and it's all the commissions go to you because you're the
That's right.
agent.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
That's makes a lot of sense. And I mean, in the prior job that you had, I mean, what would you say were the biggest lessons you learned in that period of time prior to starting your own business?
Yeah. I'll go back to Wells Fargo. The hilarious part is, they say entrepreneurs are the only people who, quit a 40-hour job week, right? To go work 80 hours to not work for somebody else. I worked
Yeah.
for Wells Fargo. I go to work Saturday mornings for like 3 hours and I hated it. I couldn't stand it. It was just, there was a physical pain, literally physical pain driving there. And even to this day, I still work Saturdays. But there's a love, there's a passion. It's not, I'm not doing it for somebody else. I largely do it for
Sailing
me.
your own boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're exactly right. It's funny, it's for me, but then it's also for my team, for the people who are here, for the clients we serve. It's for a whole bunch of other people. So what were the lessons? The biggest lessons I learned really all the way through this is, you have to work. And that doesn't mean 100 hours a week. I mean, it means you got to put in some effort.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You can't coast through this. Right.
Yeah. And tell me, I mean, in terms of, so you had I suppose, a safety net of having a company, Remax, and you were working in there. Then all of a sudden you own your own Remax. Like, what were the challenges that suddenly presented, or had you pretty much figured it out by that stage?
No, the challenge is, I mean, when you go from being under an umbrella, having an office and somebody else's, a company, if you will, to now you're on your own. I mean, sourcing the office, getting the rent. I mean, it's all the little things, getting the copier breaks. Well, that's my problem now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all those little things that go into that just isn't, you don't ever give it much thought because, I'm largely focused on the big thing, which is revenue generating activities, not the little things.
It's funny you say that. I spoke with a friend of mine a few weeks back on this podcast, and he was saying exactly, he was the number one salesperson in his company, in the company he worked in for prior to starting his own business. And he kind of thought, I'm going to absolutely knock it out of the park because, I'm going to be 100% working for myself. But of course, all of a sudden, all of your income earning sort of work is divided now between having to pay the bills and having to do this and having to do that and all of these other. So you end up only putting about maybe 50% of your time into the actual revenue generating. Whereas before, as the number one sales guy in the other place,
Sure.
you did 100% of your hours.
Right.
Yeah. So it's, I guess it's figuring out, and that's where hiring good people and things like that, which is what your focus is about.
You're exactly right. And that was my first forte into hiring good people in that era, is just the ability to get somebody who does the things that you don't want to do, but you're not good at.
Yeah.
And typically when we're not good at something, we don't want to do it anyway. Right.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm a member of a group called Strategic Coach. There's a guy called Dan Sullivan. Yeah.
Yes.
And Dan has that whole thing. He talks about the your unique ability is what it is. You're so kind of completely in flow when you're in that state. You should spend most of your time in that, doing that. And then, but there's the funny thing is like, there's things like, whatever it might be, like doing, a spreadsheet or something like that. I mean, you might hate doing that, but there are people out there that absolutely love to spend hours poring over that kind of thing. And you just need to find the people whose unique ability is what you're looking for.
You're exactly right. Yeah. And for me, that largely means hiring people opposite of me. They're oftentimes opposite in personality, not quite as gregarious, right? And they love to do the things that I don't love to do. Right.
Yeah. And you can create like an A team around you when you have those guys.
Yes. Yeah. And the people like that recognize that too. When you get somebody who is self-aware, they recognize what they are and what they are not and what they need. And they love to be in part of an environment that the one that we create, because I love to be part of it too, having those people who do the things that are best for them to do.
Yeah. In terms of setting up, I mean, your Remax, I guess, a lot of people would assume that one broker is like the other broker. Would you agree, or would you sort of say that you have a unique selling point in your business?
Yeah, there was at that time, at that era when I had my Remax, I created, I morphed into, plugged into coaching, in which had, the coaching program had designed a unique selling proposition, and I implemented that in my city and was able to carve that off for myself. Because you're right, and I think that's one of the things, one of the things I would have learned early on at certainly at Wells Fargo is, every banker is the same. Well, if every banker is the same, we'd all get the same results. Clearly, there's some things that we do differently um, to get different results. And you apply that to real estate, I'm going to say it's roughly a 90-10, certainly an 80-20, but I'm going to guess it's a 90-10 in terms of the percentage to the results. We have over 2,500 agents in this city now, maybe nearly 3,000, which is the most that's ever occurred. I bet it's still a 90-10.
Yeah, yeah. 90% of the fees are going to 10% of those guys.
It's exactly right.
It's a bit like
Yeah.
the Pareto principle, isn't it? 80-20.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
A little more skewed to the upper.
Correct. Yep.
And did you tell me this, when you were starting out in that early stage, did you have mentors or anyone to kind of help guide you?
Plugged into a coach, and that's really what catapulted my success, because, you know, us as individuals, we have to do certain things. And for me, it was, I'm going to give 100% effort. I'll bring the time, energy, and effort to it. And to be able to couple that with a coach who has been there, done that, to provide direction, to go, hey, we've got systems and strategies that work for us. They work for hundreds of other people.
Yeah.
Plug into this and implement, and you'll see a different level of success. And that's absolutely what transpired. And it still transpires to this day. I'm a huge advocate of coach, of education, because I think it is, you can either learn from your own mistakes or be wise and learn from the mistakes of others. And I just want to be wise. Right.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said for it. All right. And so you've gone through a couple of iterations, your business, you've got to currently what your company is called Legacy Impact Partners.
Legacy Impact Partners. Yep.
So tell us about that.
Yeah. So you're right. I've gone through a handful of iterations personally, and, professionally, that is. And about just over 5 years ago, I bought my first rental property, my first investment piece. Just about 3 months ago, I became financially free through the acquisition of a couple of properties closed that pushed me over the edge there. Just a little over a year ago, although I am still a realtor today, I'm still a broker, still manage a brokerage, I do not take on clients. I brought a gal in to replace me in that role. And 100% of what I do today is focused on investments. So a number of fixing
your own investments
are my own investments. Yeah. A number of fixing and flipping, dozens of rental properties, and commercial property as well. So that started 5 years ago, and just a slow shift out of brokerage, and then finally, into full-time real estate investing.
And just looking back now on that, would you have started earlier had you the opportunity, or what held you back starting only 5 years ago?
Sure. Mentally, it was you touch on this, and you're one of the best. I mean, it is nothing but a mental barrier that just prevented it. It's mainly, I'll be a little cheeky here, it's mainly the BS we tell ourselves. What I mean by that is the belief system that we have. That's what I mean by BS. Belief system that we have. This self-limiting beliefs to go, and they're just false. And as soon as you can break through that barrier, you increase your capacity to do more. I should have been buying, to answer your question, I should have been buying in 2010. I did not have any exposure, so I didn't get caught in the downswing.
Right.
And as a realtor, 2010, 11 were the best years ever, because realtors exited the market like crazy. And those of us who were left, again, the 90-10 thing, the best year of my life was either 2010 or 2000, must have been 2010, in terms of the number one, and the most homes sold. So 200 plus homes. I mean, we're just, because I don't compete against, as a realtor, you don't compete against the market, you compete against other realtors, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And the other thing is, 2010, the value was just insane, and
it's crazy.
It's funny that as a realtor, you'd be selling property to people and you'd be saying, look at this great value. And it's funny how you don't look at it yourself and think, yeah, why don't I jump in there myself?
I didn't know enough about, the management of single family rentals scared me. It was all self-limiting beliefs. That's all it was.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, well, that's an area that I like to kind of get into. And I mean, in terms of the habits and behaviors that you've developed since you've got into this, like, is there any particular area that you've found that isn't serving you, that, that you, as a broker, it served you, but when you went into investing, you found that actually wasn't really serving you?
That's a good question. Part of that is understanding what has held me back and then challenging those things. Right. So if I ever, and I make this commitment to my team, if there's ever an area that I run up to where it's scary, I now have to go there. Right. Because those things that become familiar to us are no longer scary to us. We're often scared of the unknown. And so I literally have to go attack it. Either I have to go present about it. I got to talk about it. Who said it? I forget the guy's name off the top of my head, but what becomes mentionable is manageable.
Yeah. And measurable is the other.
And measurable. Yes, exactly right. There are activities and actions that I took as a realtor, largely because that's the business, that I would never do today as an investor. And that's largely, being as a realtor, it's, you're selling yourself in many cases. It's dealing with people, it's dealing with personalities. And today as an investor, I'm dealing with, yes, because we buy direct from homeowners, but I deal with the people and the personalities to a degree, and I'm dealing with property to a degree.
Right.
And so I can tell you, like, almost, let's say the average of my 5 biggest checks that I ever was paid as a realtor, I'm telling you, the average of the 5 out of 1,000 plus sales probably are lower than my average in terms of what I work for today as an investor.
Yeah. Interesting.
So we've moved up the scale in dollars and cents, right?
Yeah. It's interesting, the self-limiting beliefs. All right. In terms of when you were working as a realtor and I know that with me, when I'm working with investors and stuff, we all have these kind of star clients or star investors that kind of inspire us because they're so successful. Did you have any guys like that kind of, had that kind of spark?
You'll get a kick out of this. I actually thought investors, because of what I would do on how my business was structured on the realtor side, I actually thought investors, from my standpoint, were the worst clients I could ever have.
Really?
They bought the cheapest homes, which meant the lowest commission to me, right?
Right, I understand.
They would buy from anybody. They don't care. I mean, although yes, people are loyal, yes, but if somebody brought them a deal, they're buying the deal from somebody else, right? And then they'd always want to beat you up or work to reduce the commission on the backside of the sale because every dollar counted. In many cases, because they overspent on a fix and flip, right?
Yeah. That's interesting. And tell me this, have you seen, obviously COVID has come along and it's disrupted the market very much. Initially, we all thought it was going to be a terrible disruption, and then it turned out to be a great, kind of incentive, or certainly it's sent the prices upwards. But how did it impact your business? So I guess your realtor business, first of all.
Yeah, on the realtor side, so I was still selling some then, just not so much. It had a little, but it wasn't as big a deal. I pretty much, when I got to the point where, I was working diligently trying to get out of the realtor side of the business. So I literally would only work referrals, and only if people called me, and I do some follow-up, just because my database is so big over the years. But other than that, I didn't spend not a penny in the year from a marketing standpoint.
Right.
Just nothing. So I was at a point, I couldn't care if
you were cruising.
I was cruising. Yeah. Because I had a revenue stream on the other side of things, because my time, energy, effort could still produce dollars. Right.
And so in your investment business, did that take any kind of a knock, or was that pretty well insulated?
Yeah. It was like for maybe 30, 60, 90 days, somewhere in that range. Just people didn't want to meet. They just didn't want to have anything to do with it. Everybody was scared, had no idea what was going on. Now, I can tell you my attitude at that time was, I'm going to buy everything I can possibly buy. Anything I can buy, I'm going to buy.
Oh, really? Interesting.
And I had not knowing, again, not having a concept. All of us hoped that this thing would be over in months, not years, but just not having an idea. I'm going, somebody's listen, it's either going to be the end of the world or everything's going to get better
Come
and we're
back.
going to find a way to navigate it. And
Yeah.
either one, I can't control the end of the world. We're all going to zero. If that's the way it is, that's the way it is. And
Yeah.
if it gets better, I'm going to profit.
Yeah, I can remember. It reminds me of just after the September 11th attacks back in 2001,
Sure.
and everyone just thought it was the end of the world,
Right.
economically speaking and stuff.
Right.
But a couple of years later, everything bounces back, and they were
Correct.
talking about the end of travel and stuff like that back then, because
Correct.
airplane, obviously, and people have a short memory, and things just
You
two
know,
years
we're
later, we're back. Yeah.
two years later. I mean, I recall in December, they were talking about we're ahead of travel. Number of people flying. We're ahead of where we were to pre-COVID.
That's crazy.
I mean,
Already.
there is something to be said for Rothschild may have said it, when there's blood in the streets, buy property. And what was intended there, right?
Yeah.
Is when everything's going to heck, and Warren Buffett has obviously made a fortune out of, huge giant swings in the market. 2010 in the real estate market as an example, but March, April of 2020, the market went crazy and there was tremendous opportunities to buy
Yeah.
and you'd be well rewarded, a year to 2 years later.
Yeah. Yeah. Switching gears a little bit, do you have any passions or hobbies outside of your business that you're?
I do a couple of things. I love traveling. So we're going to, my wife and I are headed your general direction. We're headed, it's our 20th anniversary. So we're headed to Greece and Italy here
Oh, nice.
this summer. So I travel, probably every other month still to this day. I plug into a number of real estate masterminds. The benefit of that is, outside of business, there's tremendous personal relationships that I build with these people. And
Yeah.
I love having conversations with them about real estate and everything else. There's
Yeah.
just a tremendous commonality between what we do, and that often spurs other things. I hunt a few times a year, which is great, and fish, deep sea fish, which I love to do.
Okay, nice. Yeah, and so obviously the travel is interesting. Yeah, and in terms of the habits and is there any area that you struggle with? I mean, one of the things that I have a problem with was always FOMO. The fear of missing out,
Yeah.
and I'd always be sort of finding it very hard to say no to stuff. Is there any areas that you kind of struggle with like that?
Yeah, I've had exactly the same thing, what you just said early on. And I think some of that is, for me, getting to a certain level of success, and I don't know exactly what that was, but getting to a point where you're going, instinctively, you can't say yes to everything. Every time you say yes to something, you say no to something else. It's
Yeah,
because the calendar's gone, the time's out. That and getting clear, what are the intended outcomes, have helped me get through that. Because I get friends who call with all sorts of business ideas, opportunity to invest, whatever it may be. And I think I passed on 99.9% of everything just because it's focused today. We really got a good sense of the business model and what I want my life to be like at the same time, how I
hmm
make money, where I want to go, where do I want to be in 10 and 20 years. That, one of the habits that I added in, I get to a point where I was very stressed out. And so stress and the management thereof, became in the forefront of my mind to go, how am I going to manage all this? Because I have so many things going on involved in multiple businesses. And I added in, I don't know, maybe it's been 18 months now or so, um, habitual working out. So
yeah,
I work out 5 days a week now. You would think I kept that up from my playing days, but I didn't. I would do some cardio, but not a lot, and not enough from a routine basis, not enough to make it a habit. And so, at this point, join a gym right by my office, on the way to my office. I mean, it's just perfect. There's no excuse. There's no reason not to go. So for 18 months, I think I've missed about 5 days ever in 18 months.
that's
So
great. Yeah,
it has become a habit, and there's tremendous benefits. Yes, physical, but the largest one is mental habit, or the
yeah.
mental benefit of stress reduction, your ability to think, to be clear, to process. There's
Yeah, I love it.
huge benefits. Yep.
I'm a huge proponent of that. Right, I fell into the whole fitness thing about 20 years ago, and I
Yeah.
just and my father died very young,
Okay.
and so it kind of had an impact on me watching that, and so I kind of thought, okay, I'm going to be the fittest mofo out there. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to be. So I'd like to talk about your book
Yeah.
now, Neil, if that's okay. I mean,
Yeah.
Unicorn Hunting. Tell us, where the name comes from, first of all.
Yeah, unicorn hunting. So I would call it unicorn hunting for real estate investment companies. Here, I'll show you how to easily attract, screen, and land a unicorn. Yeah, I call it the complete hiring funnel. And so the name came from, the ability to find that perfect employee. I define unicorn employee by the person who's perfectly fit to do that exact role, whatever that role is. You talked about spreadsheets, if that's it, that's it. But at the same time, who matches your culture,
Yeah.
right? Those non-negotiables that you have as an individual and you have as a business, as a reflection of you as an individual. They match both those things, because a perfect employee who, somebody might be a unicorn in my role might not line up in your culture, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good point. Actually, on that whole point, I'm very curious. Just, I mean, in terms of your own company culture,
sure.
has the work from home sort of movement kind of, has that caught it? Has that impacted your culture in any way?
Dramatically, and that's largely where this book came from. I was faced at a point a couple years ago, to go, all right, it's time to hire, it's time to scale. And we ended up finding out that in my backyard in Des Moines, I couldn't hire anybody, meaning almost nobody would show up from an application standpoint. The numbers were dismal.
Wow.
And so it was time to go, all right, well, let's pivot this and figure out, how do I hire remotely? And from my standpoint, remote has meant US based employees. Time zone, there's just a bunch of positives that line up from that standpoint.
Mm,
How do I get how do I get the best for my money? And so as soon as you go, I don't need them to be in my office, then that means, how do I narrow this search down? And so that's largely what the book is about how to attract more people than you'd ever need in any role, literally thousands. And
right.
then how to screen them all out with ease, so you don't spend a whole bunch of time, and then boil that down to interview and then onboard somebody. But yes, it has impacted, in a big way. And from my standpoint, in a positive way, because it really forced me to pivot, to go change my belief system, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
To go, I never thought I could hire remotely. I have to have somebody in my office. I fought all that stuff to go, how am I going to figure out how to manage somebody?
Yeah.
How do I know if they do
Remotely.
how do I know if they do the work? How do I know if they're any good? And
How
that
do
led us
I?
down a path to go, all right, well, if that's your belief, let's change some things. And it started with culture. What am I? If I if I had to go rework for somebody remotely, could I do it? And how would they manage me? And I just know I'm totally accountable. So I need to hire totally accountable people.
That's it. Yeah. That's what it
Right.
boils down to. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I think that was a big eye opener for a lot of people around the world. Is that they kind of, if you asked any manager prior to COVID, like can you hire sort of graduates from college and like let them work from home? And no
Yeah.
chance. That would have been
Right.
the
Right.
and yet here we are. 2 years into lockdowns and various kind of restrictions and stuff, and
Yeah.
it seems like people have figured it out now that actually you can. And I guess technology is helping to a degree. The fact that we can have these kind of Zoom calls
Yes.
and all that. In terms of your culture, do you have like an all hands on deck type kind of meeting once a week, or how do you manage the kind of?
Yeah. So we follow the book traction, and that largely, whether you do it remotely or not remotely, it doesn't really matter. But it laid out for us a process and procedures from a meeting standpoint, and really how to best manage the business. And so we do a daily huddle every day. It's about 15 minutes tops. Everybody's on the call, and it's we open with, what's your positive for the day.
That's a good one.
So
Yeah.
we want to talk about what's going on in people's lives, and then we move into business KPIs. Everybody's got a number, and in most cases, everybody has numbers that they're reporting on
Yeah.
from a KPI standpoint in every role. And so we're going through that, and then we move on to where we have from a transaction standpoint. What do we need? What are the highlights?
And who needs to be delivering on something for somebody else to close
That's
out their bit? And
that's exactly right. Yep,
yeah.
yep. And it's for us, uh, because everybody, our culture is total accountability, personal accountability. Lou Holtz said it, I think. You know, a reporter once asked him, the famous football coach from Notre Dame, how do you, all these people, all your teammates, all these players are positive. They all have positive energy. He said, how do you motivate these people? And he said, it's easy. I just eliminate the ones who aren't.
Yeah.
So, right. I mean, it starts at the door. Who gets in and getting those people in? So everybody's accountable. Our meetings are very lighthearted. They're very jovial. So you'll often, I mean, people are harassing people. It's fun. And everybody knows, because at the end of the day, it boils down, or we hitting the numbers or not.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
Fun, fun aside.
I don't have to, there's no whip or anything. It's just, this is the goal. Are we there or not? Everybody
Yeah.
knows. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm curious, just, we were, as you mentioned earlier, we're recording this podcast kind of the first couple of days of February.
Yeah.
And at the moment, the news cycle seems to be all filled with, inflation, labor
Yeah.
shortages, supply chain issues. And of course, you got the geopolitical of Russia and Ukraine. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what are your views on the outlook for the market now for the next 12 months?
Yeah. It's inflation is real. There's inflation is double-edged, and it depends where you're at in this market. Meaning, for us, inflation will drive up building costs, and what that will do is pull up in a very big way the resale value of properties.
For sure.
Your
Yeah.
10, 20, 30, 50-year-old home. I mean, it pulls it up. There is some benefits there if you're a long holder of real estate, is that inflation is going to move real asset values.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it will depend from our standpoint. When I look at the numbers, I track every week. I track the 7-day. What are the number of new listings? So how many homes for sale come on in my market, and then pendings. What had an accepted offer that went off the market? And since about January of last year, almost a little over a year right now, the numbers going off the market versus coming on are greater. There's more homes going off the market sold that are coming on the market. This is the first time ever. You'd have a week here or there, that certainly dotted over a period of time, but never have we ever seen a year straight of homes coming off the market, a net loss of new properties for sale. Never.
So inventory is down.
Inventory's down, demand's way up. And so in my mind, until that changes, interest rates can rise, and they're going to, it appears.
Yeah.
But there is so much demand that it's not going to matter.
Yeah, interest rates do seem like they are going to rise. And the one thing that I would say about, I mean, definitely if house prices are rising, that's a good thing. But if you're sort of in the beginning of your journey of buying real estate, and
Yep.
a lot of people go in and they can only afford so much, and so they they put everything into it and they borrow. That's the one concern that I would have for people out there that are kind of in this split place.
I would agree with that, but I'd further it to say, no matter where you're at in the journey, if you go all in on one thing, it's
you're gonna pay. Yeah,
it can be real tough. Yeah, you're exactly right. So what would I do there? I go find a partner, go figure out how to make it not all in, figure out how to limit that exposure. But yeah, I agree with you that, and if you're going to do it, and it's your first property, lock in and get a 30-year fixed rate and be patient.
Crunch the debt.
Correct.
That's some advice that I got from somebody based in New York. He said, just sit there, crunch the debt. You'll always do well.
Yep, that's right.
In terms of the main risks that you are looking at from your own portfolio, what would you say they are?
That's a good question. All right. So on the residential side, our primary risks are property management. Who's involved doing the day-to-day stuff? Because property management can absolutely destroy your portfolio. How do they, when there's a problem, how do they get it done? Meaning, who do they hire? How's it done? What are they paying? Because that is where you can operationally, that's the most critical factor.
Yeah.
Market wise, I feel like we're in a, outside of something really unforeseen, meaning a large employer exiting, going bankrupt, having a real problem that would dramatically affect the whole city. Outside of that, it seems like, the properties are in good shape. They're well maintained, our population growth. So I talked about supply and demand. My city is the number one growth city in population growth, in the Midwest. And so from my standpoint, I'm like, if we just continue to have a supply and demand factor, the demand outpacing the supply, you're seeing prices go up, you're seeing rent rates go up, you just see everything increase. And over a period of time, if that maintains over a period of a decade, we're going to be in fine spot.
Yeah, for
On
sure.
the commercial side, we've got varied tenants in varied industries there. So our intent has always been to buy commercial assets that, get backfilled from somebody. They're versatile enough or in demand enough that if this person leaves, this
You'll
asset is
find.
still
Yeah.
in demand. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the big one. And tell me, just something that I personally follow quite closely is it seems to be a lot of the investors that I'm speaking to. Certainly, I look after a lot of corporate sort of offices and things like that.
Yeah.
And ESG and the green and environmental sort of energy and stuff like that. That
Yeah.
seems to be a big driving factor. And the value of buildings that are old and don't have those energy efficiencies seem to be coming under pressure from that. Are you seeing
Sure.
that yourself over there?
A little, but not a lot, just because the stock of buildings, and the rate in which you can pay. I think that you'll see it in more publicly traded companies. You'll see it in bigger companies, but some of the smaller places, it has not been kind of as important. If you're a big tenant though, and you're gonna, you need to place a building, or you need a lot of square footage, and you've
It's a
got some
major.
public, yeah, it's a big factor.
Yeah,
Yeah, mine are more that tier down, regional or city players, and they just don't have so much, external pressure from what does the public.
investors.
Yeah,
Yeah,
correct.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
That's interesting. Neil, apart from your own book, which
Yeah.
I'll be putting a link in the show notes, but have you got any, what would the one book that you would recommend as a resource to
Uh, you know what? I'm gonna do twice as good. I'm gonna give you two books, one from a business standpoint and one that changed my mentality.
Okay.
So from business standpoint, Confessions of a Real Estate Entrepreneur. It's a terrific book. It talks largely about commercial real estate and this whole story. It's wonderful. The book that changed my mentality when I was 22 years old was The Millionaire Mind by Dr. Thomas Stanley. So he wrote The Millionaire Next Door. It's probably his most famous book, but he wrote The Millionaire Mind, which is the psyche of those wealthy people. Terrific book.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I must have a look at those. And in terms of other resources, are there any kind of things that you recommend out there? Like, I don't know, other podcasts, or what would you do in terms of just learning and educating yourself? Is there any?
Podcast. Yeah, no, that's a good question. Podcasts are absolutely my favorite because they're so easy, it's so digestible, right?
Yeah,
It's just the best. And that's, when I started my real estate investing journey, that's really what I plugged into, is just podcast after podcast, downloading. And that led me ultimately into multiple groups, befriending a whole bunch of people in the industry, and really bringing things up a curve.
right. I get you.
Yeah.
Neil, the best advice that you ever got, what would you say
Oh,
that is?
from the book of Thomas Stanley. Be honest with all people at all times.
Okay, good advice. And then linked to that question, and this is a question I ask all my guests, knowing what you know now, looking back on your career and stuff, like, what advice would you give to your younger self starting out on the career?
Get a mentor. Find somebody you want to be like and just emulate them. I'm talking almost everything they do. If it's something that you value and say that'd be cool if I was like that or I had that, just do it. Just
Find
be
that
like them.
person. Yeah, yeah.
Find that person. Success leaves clues. Just copy it. Yeah.
Success leaves clues. I love it. Thanks so much for your time today,
Yours
Neil.
too, Kevin.
If people would like to, reach out and connect with you, what's the best place to find you?
Yeah, two places: LinkedIn, Neil J. Timmins, or Facebook as well, Neil J. Timmins, and I'll make sure I get you those links too.
Great stuff. Well, Neil, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you. Thanks again.
Likewise. Thanks, Kevin.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to Behind the Facade. If you enjoyed the show or found it useful in any way at all, please take a moment to leave a review over on iTunes, or alternatively, share it out on social media or with a friend who you think the podcast could help. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, please connect with me via my Facebook group, Behind the Facade Community. And the long-time listeners will be aware that I have a YouTube channel called Gavin J. Gallagher, where I have recently begun posting these episodes. These actual podcast episodes are up there to watch, and shorter videos videos from the construction site that we have at the moment, and various other kind of bits of advice and stuff that I put up there. So go and check it out. If you're not a fan of YouTube, you can stay in touch with the various projects I am working on by joining my tribe over at gavinjgallagher.com. And while you're there, you'll be able to check out the online learning and education stuff that I have on the real estate business, including my mastermind. That's all for now, guys. I'll see you back here next week.